get started now for the main events of the evening, and that is firstly introducing you to Dr. Sandra Bell. So Sandra has 30 years experience helping organizations develop their skills in organizational and operational resilience. She is a specialist in crisis management and is a BCI member, as is James, who's on also. And she used to work at SunGard and Capita, but also, interestingly, the United States Olympic Committee at one point as well. And more excitingly, she obtained a doctorate by blowing things up, she told us last week. So maybe she can expand on that and explain how that works, because that sounds pretty good to me. So please welcome to the stage, Sandra Bell, Dr. Sandra Bell.
Thank you very much, Lee. Yes, you're absolutely right. I did start my career blowing things up. I did my sort of PhD in what was called personal blast protection. So way back when, in the early 80s, everyone assumed that people died when they blew up because they got squashed. So the body was squashed by the stress wave. But actually, what it turns out to be is it's actually a high frequency stress wave transmitting through the body. When it hits the lungs, it gets reflected as a tensile wave. That ruptures the alveoli, and then you drown in your own fluid. So basically what we did was we put a notch filter in, which filtered out that particular injurious frequency, and the rest is history. That went forward, and then life became less exciting, but hopefully just as rewarding. So thank you very much for inviting me here today. This is my first GRC Supper Club, and the virtual format. As I say, I have my gin and tonic here, and also because it is COVID-19, I also have my small Chris Whitty to keep me company in my home office here as well. So I thought I'd start. The question is that we've been posed is, will COVID-19 lead to a reframing of operational resilience within the boardroom? So I thought I'd start with the boardroom. Now, I've spent a lot of time within boardrooms trying to help them develop the skill, will and grit to succeed regardless of what happens. So the job of the board is very much, and always has been, organizational resilience. So making sure that the business is there, optimizing the organization to the external environment, making sure that it achieves its corporate aims, and making sure, ensuring the long-term prosperity of the organization. So the board is very much about it. If you say what are their sort of key success criteria, then it is very much about competitive advantage. It's about growth. It's about market position. It's about providing customer value, etc., etc. But obviously they lead the operations. So the operations is very much about harvesting the value from the assets within the organization. So whether they be human assets, and harvesting the knowledge for, the value from the knowledge, or whether they be physical assets and harvesting the value from them. So at the operational level, again, if you think about the key performance indicators, it's all about efficiency. It's all about profit margin. It's all about making sure the products and services carry on and are still provided. So when I think about operational resilience, it is about making sure that the products and services can still be provided no matter what happens. And that sort of resonates with some of the regulation that we see around the world, so particularly in the UK, the FCA and the PRA putting in regulation on financial organisations, and it's about the ability of the firms to prevent, adapt, respond, recover, and then learn from any operational disruptions. And the PRA said that they have an expectation of the financial firms to ensure that important business services are able to remain within their impact tolerances, even when they're relying on third parties. So it's not just an individual organisation, it's the whole economic ecosystem that surrounds it to make sure that the products and services come out. So what happens when you lose it? Well, clearly you can't do your products and services, but clearly, there's more to an organisation than products and services. But certainly in the finance sector, and there are other sectors, critical national infrastructure, for example, where it is in the public interest to make sure that those services keep going. So then I thought, well, why bother changing where we are at the moment? What's happened with sort of COVID-19 that actually says, well, maybe the board needs to think slightly differently, not just about operational resilience, but also about operations. And so I really thought, well, isn't business continuity enough? So I thought about the old paradigm. So the paradigm that we sort of currently work with in terms of organisations is that we have a business as usual operations, and so that's where we design our operations to achieve our outcome, and we have a bit of slack in those, but not very much, if we want to maximise our profits to enable us to handle sort of incidents. Then we have our sort of corporate strategy. And that's about sort of changing to the long-term structural changes. We maybe have a 5-year cycle, so if something changes, we'll rechange it. We'll address it. We'll change the organisation and get back on track to optimisation. Then for the acute changes, those shocks, we have our business continuity that allows us to continue the delivery of products and services at predefined levels. So in the case of our fire, our flood, our power outages, our 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, whatever happens to hit the organisation, we are able to do the priority products and services. And the organisational resilience to me is different, because that means that you cannot stop doing it. So you actually have to find an alternative way and to adapt so that you can keep on going. So our sort of critical national infrastructures throughout the world have a legal requirement continue, and we're now finding the financial services also have a legal requirement to continue. So it's more than just recovering with business continuity, but actually, bigger than that, to make sure that it doesn't fall over in the first place. And then finally, we have our crisis management. Now, surely if you don't have a regulatory requirement to continue, and you're hit with such a large operational impact, and the whole world is, then why do you need to be resilient from an operations perspective? Surely you can just shut down. So why does that work? Well, again, I thought about that, and I'm looking at the organisations, through COVID-19, and I think there's 2 issues that you come out with. At the moment, the world is, we've got complexity in our risk landscape, we've got uncertainty, we've got risks with adversaries, so people coming in to want to disrupt us. And we also have a completely hyper-connected and with hyper-extended supply chains and a news cycle that is sort of 24/7. So there's no such thing as an isolated incident. It ripples throughout the whole economic ecosystem. So the 2 things that struck me as sort of changes is that operational disruptions, can't be on their own anymore. They so easily spiral up into strategic, financial, and even existential threats to the organisation. And then the other one is that if you don't have operational resilience, or resilience at the operational level to be able to veer and haul and make sure you can keep on going, then your strategic options are severely limited. So what do I mean by that? So let's think about COVID-19 response. So the supply chain was pretty much, one of the really early casualties of COVID-19. Now, I'm not sure if everybody, aware, but 200 of the 500 Fortune 500 companies actually have a dependency, a primary dependency in China, but not just China, actually in Wuhan. Now, what happened there is what we found was that the shareholder price dropped significantly on the 1st of January. So way before any supply chain operational disruptions were happening. So this was just simply because news went out. So what was potentially an operational disruption that organizations may or may not have had in place because of a buffer, because there was that operational risk, it actually affected the share price and hit a strategic risk. So that's a risk spiral before, normally you close down the operational risk, hopefully in time before the strategic risk happens, but you can't do that now. Then if you think about the health risk protection measures, the lockdowns, the school closures, the work closures, etc., etc. So they have forced an absolute wholesale change in operations. And that has been difficult for some organizations. So some organizations that weren't agile did not have operational resilience in a way that they could change the way that they operate, had to close down. They had no choice. If you have no working from home capability, if you have no alternative suppliers, then you are going to have to close down until you've got something in place. So therefore, some operational agility would have helped and would have helped those strategic decisions. And then obviously new technology came in so fast, Zoom, cloud. Normally disruptive technologies are dealt with in the long term on the corporate strategy. But actually you're getting, these sort of Zoom and cloud coming in and people changing it and introducing all sorts of risks. For example, compliance risks, shadow IT, all of that coming in, GDPR, where is the personal data? And then if you think about the recovery as well, health and safety, organizations have a legal responsibility to provide a safe place of work. How do you know what's safe? And if you haven't got options, then you may be being pushed down an operation that may be, not quite as safe as you would like it to be. And again, the risk spiral on the data, the rapid operational changes means that most organizations have lost track of where their personal data is. Home working means that it's probably not protected in the same way that it was on the corporate network. The use of shadow IT, for example, in the UK, our Prime Minister was found out for actually implementing an unapproved version of Zoom for cabinet meetings. And so obviously there's some security issues there. And what about the collection of data that we're collecting on people regarding their COVID, whether they've got temperatures, whether they've self-isolated? That is personal information. Where is it? Is it on somebody's bring your own device at home? And does that mean from a GRC that you are actually breaching compliance, which is a board issue? So to come back to Lee's question, will COVID-19 lead the board to reframe operational resilience? I think it's a resounding yes, but probably not for the reasons that Lee is expecting me to say. So
all right. Well, I'm glad you said the question because I forgot to say the question at the start. So that's very good of you. Thank you.
So I don't think you can, we can't any longer assume that operational risks can simply be dealt by operational means. The timescales of the different risks, the mixing of structural with acute risks and incidents, the interconnectedness and that we have throughout the world means that there is no longer a clear distinction between structural and acute risks, which means in turn that the tools absolutely have to be integrated. So for me, organizational resilience, business continuity, disaster recovery, security, normal operations, risk management, all needs to work together under that umbrella of the organizational resilience, working off sort of three fronts. Number one, that you've got to have a strong, agile leadership and culture that can move if it has to and can and defend if it needs to. You need robust yet flexible operations, because if you don't have those flexible operations, you can't respond to acute risks and you severely limit your strategic choices to the structural risks later on. And then finally, you need friends. You need that supportive network, because no organization just delivers products and services by themselves. There's everybody else as well. So that is the end of my little speech, but
Perfect.
I'd like to put a poll to everybody. So clearly, the post-COVID-19 world is going to change somewhat. We're going to have increased use of the technology, digitalization, the sorts of things that we're having here, you know, sort of increased use of technology. Supply chains are going to be completely rethought. And so really what I'd like to ask you guys is, do you anticipate that the business model that you return to will be identical to your pre-pandemic model?
Just waiting for the attendees to answer. Up to 35, 40, 50% of people have voted.
Let's
I'll
see.
give it a few more seconds.
What we get.
There's one clear winner on this at the minute anyway, so I don't think it'll matter too much. And we've got a few questions have come in as well. So, and thanks for being perfectly on time. I didn't have to ring any bells on that one. So we've got about 80%. 80% of people have voted. So I'll close that now. Just with time.
So what did we get? What did we get?
So I'm sharing the results.
Oh.
So 90% are saying no.
Josh, now that is really, really interesting. Now, the reason I say that's really interesting, the same question was posed to sort of leadership of organizations over the past couple of weeks by the Business Continuity Institute. And what we've got is that actually 75% expect to come back to a different business model. So they expect it, so completely the opposite way around. So I'd be interested to hear why people think they're coming back to the same.
Yeah, well, if there's anyone that would like to give their answer to that, please just send me in the chat now, and I will turn you on. I will turn you on so you can ask the question. But no, there's been quite, while we're waiting for anyone to ping me on the chat room about that, there's a few questions that came in. I know Peter Shelnick had a couple, Manoj, Kuala and Gareth Evans have, and also one from Harpreet as well. So I'll try and get through them all. I was going to try and turn people's webcams on so we can see them. I've not had a chance to get a response back from any of those that said they're able to do on the web. So if either of you or any of you can, let me know and I can turn it on. But the first question from Peter was, should the board modify role descriptions, performance objectives, and or org structure, was his first question. And just to follow that up, in the current crisis, it seems that boards are becoming management teams, and therefore, do we still need the boards? So there's two for you, Sandra.
Yeah. So so if I take the second one first, actually, Peter, you're absolutely right. In some cases, what we find is the board are what I would call using the long-handled screwdriver. Now, over the years, I do a lot of work with boards on crisis, on crisis sort of leadership, so as opposed to crisis management. And so it's you know, there is always a temptation you know, for the board to dive into you know, what they're comfortable with. If, you know, a lot of boards have come up through the operations, come up through the ranks of the organization, and when they see something broken, there is always a temptation to delve in with their long-handled screwdriver and sort that out. And really, that is not that's why they've got experts in there to do that. You know, that's a skill you know, that you know, in practice there needs to be you know, the boards need to, you know, recognize their role, which is outward looking, maintaining the, you know, communications, the competitive advantage, looking after the strategic aims of the organization, and have the trust in their management teams to manage the operational disruption that's going on. Now, a lot of organizations went into COVID-19 without that distinction between crisis and and operational resilience and operational business continuity. And so that's where we have seen very much a merging of the roles. They're both equally important, and I think time will tell. If you just do the operational stuff without the strategic, looking after the strategy of the organisation, you're not going to be set up to grow post lockdown. But if you just look at the post lockdown and the strategic aims, then you could become bankrupt because your operations are falling apart. You've got to do both. And so it's really comes back to the other question, organizational structure. It's not so much a changing of the organizational structure, but it's a really, I think it's recognizing who does what in these sorts of situations, and learning to work as a team and trust each other to do our own individual jobs.
Brilliant, thank you, Sandra. And a couple of people point out, actually, the question, the poll that we put together and sent out was actually, do you anticipate that the business model that you return to will be identical? So the 90% was actually saying it won't be identical. So
that's obviously, no, that's good, but that's clearly too much of that in there. So apologies. Yes.
Too much or too little. One of those two. I'm just wondering if you've got any more quick questions. There's one from Manoj. Would you recommend that organizations set up new departments called Operational Resilience Management and create new job roles called Operational Resilience Manager to deal with op resilience?
I don't think resilience is something that you can manage. My view of resilience from an organizational perspective is that it is a business outcome. It is something, it's a bit like saying, do you set up a another business outcome, maybe profit, so that's a business outcome. So how many organizations have got a department for profit? So that's one side of it. It just doesn't seem right, because it is, everyone needs to do something. Everyone needs to contribute to it. You need resilient people, you need resilient teams, you need resilient departments, you need resilient IT, you need resilient you name it, everything needs to be flexible and robust. But it needs to be led and it needs to be coordinated. So I think it's more of a facilitation role and a coordination role, and not a management role. Management, makes it assume that you've got a plan and you can put it in place, and if you do all of these things, it'll happen. But resilience isn't like that, because it is about skill, will, and grit, not just skill. So it's about culture as well. So absolutely, you need people empowered, but I think if you went down a management route, it could very easily just drop off the agenda.
Yeah, well, there's quite a few questions coming in, or comments on that, so it might be something we pick up in the panel. But I know Thomas, his role is actual resilience manager, so that'll be an interesting.
I've been a resilience manager. I've had that role as well, actually. Yeah.
So it's definitely creating a lot of comments, and I know Harpreet's mentioned a few years ago being in a resilience risk management function, DB, Deutsche Bank. So it may be something we can pick up in the panel discussion with Thomas, actually, if a few people have questions, and I will promise to get a camera of somebody to ask a question. I've got so many screens open now, it's like the Krypton factor. But I'm just conscious of time. I'll keep these questions obviously on my queue, and we may be able to come back to them. I'm just conscious that we've got Michael and then James to go, and then people might be looking for the hour to exit. So thank you very much, Sandra. That was brilliant.
No, thank you.
I know you mentioned that the BCI survey is recently, I think it's out now, right? Did you mention?
I think so. Yep.
Yep. So I'll hopefully share that as part of the the follow-up to this. I did forget at the beginning, it might have been the bitter that I wanted to thank. Obviously, this is a peer network, but we actually, with the live events, we need sponsors to pay for the dinners and the drinks. And SAI and Bowman Group are both supporting this trilogy. And we also have an illustrator that's in the background at this minute in time, Danny Burgess, who we've used, or I've used quite a few times on the live events, who's going to produce us a illustration per session. And I'll also circulate that around as well. And that's the Bowman Group for supporting that. So you'll hopefully get some content on the back of this that will, add value to all of you on the call at this minute in time. So thank you, Sandra.